What's up? Welcome to Tales Tomorrow. I'm Morrow, your storyteller for today. With me have some more RPG horror stories. Speaking of RPG horror stories, today's story is probably going to be a singular story because it's about a Westmarches campaign. I kind of realized that I've been recording off more than I can chew, so I have to record something in between to split the video up a little bit and just try to find ways to bridge things together in a sense. I don't know. I'm trying to piece it all together, okay? I'm doing my best. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to this story for today. Long Westmarch Story by Sebri. Hello Morrow, I've been watching you and your channel for quite some time. I've sent the story to some other YouTubers and I could have sworn that I'd sent it to you originally, but according to my sent items, that's not the case. None of them have read it on their channels yet though, and with you rereading your emails, I figured now's a good time for me to resend, or rather send this story to you. Anyway, I'm sorry this story rambles or goes on for ages. Length of this email should tell you the subject of the email is indeed accurate. Now, I'm not one for trigger warnings, and honestly, I tend to ignore them, so sorry if they're not quite right, but I'm trying my best here. Trigger warning for mentions of struggle snuggle, ERP, false accusations, DM favoritism, abuse of power, manipulation, and double standards. Oh my god, you just listed all the things that make for a very juicy story. I shouldn't be getting that excited because honestly, horrible things happen to players is terrible, but like, you just listed all the things out there that usually make a story extremely juicy and just fraught. Is that a word? Fraught. Packed with drama. There we go. Anyway, let's get to it. So this story happened a few years back. I've changed the names, hopefully enough so that nobody gets recognized, yada yada. The cast is as follows. Alien, guy who was in my weekly campaign for a while before the events of this story, takes place and who invited me to my first ever Westmarch. Dante, owner of the problem server in question. Deer, a DM with a strange idea of how D&D was meant to work. Kirby, a player who never became a DM but who enjoyed character-driven stories. Catgirl, a DM who practically didn't care about combat. All she really cared about was character-driven stories. It would often give us some extremely interesting and fun quests. 11 out of 10 DM and a great friend. Dogboy, DM who was also Catgirl's long-distance BF. Knight, a somewhat socially awkward player who enjoyed min-maxing his characters. When I read things like Catgirl and Dogboy after the internet has ruined and rotted my brain, I just imagine girls from Necaparo, like Chocola or Vanilla at this point. Anyway, completely off tangent, let's get to it. So this story begins quite some time before the server in question was created, as many stories as such this do on Discord. Alien was a smart guy who would make some interesting builds in my game. He played a Warforged Soul Knife Rogue. One day he invited me and the other players of my weekly campaign to a Westmarch server. I never heard of the concept before and ended up investing quite a bit of time into the server that I got invited into. Then things started to get a bit weird and my story takes a bait and switch turn as I reveal that the server wasn't the problem server. Not really. There was some pretty big favoritism going on in the server and strange rulings if I remember right. This leads to a group of people branching off and leaving the server. Stay for quite a while after thought will become less active once the split happens. Once the new group split off, there was a time when they were bouncing around from Westmarch server to Westmarch server, but the group didn't really stick with any of them for very long. Eventually they found a new home by making one for themselves for a while. It was good. I joined in, made some character that I'll call Mez and Zarzi. Now what matters for the story is Mez's story. Mez has an amnesia backstory, except I talked to the DMs of the server about her backstory, so I knew what it was even though she didn't, and her backstory was that she was originally a beholder who found a scroll of wish, and, being paranoid about the nearby city as beholders tend to be, thinking they were plotting against her, she wished to be able to come and go from the fair city, which being the monkey's paw that it is, turned her into an elf, with all her memories of being a beholder erased and her going to the city in a daze, and her reaching the city and snapping out of it was where I picked up her as a PC. She was an aberrant mind sorcerer, and, also sadly important for the story, is that she was female and I'm male. Yo, that sounds like a sick backstory. I love it. Honestly, I didn't even think about the fact that maybe it was like a creature that wished themselves to be mortal or look mortal, and then suddenly, because they changed their psyche and changed themselves physically, they lost the memory of being the creature, but the subclass ties to their initial power. That is so cool. Holy hell, that's so cool. Zarzi was an Aasimar druid, and her story developed and things happened. She became a vampire and would spend a fair bit of time around her master, Alucard, who was an NPC. Now this server had a rule that you were allowed to ERP if the channels weren't visible to the server at large. Admins could see every channel on the server, DMs could see all the rooms that players had and all this stuff, but most players would have a rather limited view of the server, which consisted of their own private room at an inn that they stayed and kept their characters at or their house, and then they would have to ask the DM or admin to change the permissions of their room if they wanted someone else to come and visit them. Zarzi was the one and only character that I ever ERP'd as, even to this day. Things got very steamy in a vampire castle as Alucard's player was pretty horny on maid, and I didn't exactly protest. Everything on there was consensual. It fit a little weird from time to time. I'm just trying to imagine from a DM's perspective what it'd be like to be like, hey DM, could you please change permissions for this one room so I can go do virtual ERP hanky-panky with somebody? And the DMs are the only ones that can see this. Things that can see every single channel. So it's almost like DMs are basically playing like a peeping Tom, or a little bit like a Japanese love hotel managers, where they know the things that are happening, but they don't mention to anybody. If you want to ERP on my server, don't tell me. Just make your private thing. I don't need to know. Like I said, things were mostly fine for a while. This was pretty much the scene that was playing out for months, though there were some hiccups. Deer was someone who I would have considered a friend at the time, so I kind of overlooked the red flags. The DM chat on the server was quite a bit of a DMs talking about which player NPCs they did or did not like. I was a DM on the server at the time though, given that I was already running a weekly game. My output from missions was rare, though I was active with my NPCs. Deer in DM chat made it very clear that he did not like several players, not just PCs, but players. He fairly often complained about Knight and Kirby, Dante, who's on the server, and Alien, who was another admin. All admins were also DMs, but only a minority of DMs were admins, so were to DM what DMs were to players, would often pile on with the complaints about Knight, though not so much on Kirby. This actually happened kind of semi-frequently in the other RPG Horror Stories server. There were a couple of players that sometimes would have maybe concerns or questions towards specific DMs, or maybe, I don't know, let's say for example, something happened in 2022 or 2023 that made the player want to step away from the server because they were dealing with other IRL stuff and stress was just getting to them. And then the DM in there, I don't remember which one, it might have been Lore DM or something, they basically said, oh, I don't like this player now. I don't want to do anything for this player or any kind of stories for this player or run any content for this player because they decided they want to step away from the server because completely arbitrary things going on out there and stuff. And dude, it's just the kind of stuff that you gotta make sure you don't have happening. How in a situation or a place where your DMs, your dungeon master that you're supposed to play with and try to get along with is actually bad-mouthing you, that creates a place for toxicity and festering bad, negative experiences towards the people that are involved or being talked about. I'm pretty sure I was on the receiving end for some of this stuff, especially when my mother was in a hospital. And probably there was some backroom talks going on about, oh, Maru's not putting up his sessions as much. He's not running as many DM sessions and stuff. Sorry that I was busy dealing with my sickly mother that was at a hospital, and I need to make sure that she's okay, especially when she got out of the hospital. Sorry, I have IRL priorities and stuff. Actually, no, you know what? I don't apologize. I have IRL priorities to my family, and at the end of the day, I can spend my time doing whatever the hell I damn please. But when you have this situation happen, it definitely can fester some sort of a toxic environment because you basically now have DMs out there that are actively bad-mouthing players over one thing or the other. I will be honest, sometimes with some of the players, I may not be able to get along at everything, but I don't feel ill will or feel a desire to want to negatively criticize any of my players in my campaign. If I ever have like a direct criticism, you know what I do? I tell it to the player directly. I don't have a special channel where I go over with Mary and Micah and another one of our friends that's trying to learn DMing and stuff and start just being like, hey, remember that player from the other day? They were being so rude and inconsiderate. I'm honestly just thinking of not even running stuff for them because that creates a very toxic environment. If I have a problem with a player, I tell them that directly. If I have a problem with a player character, I tell the player about the player character and ask him if what they do right now is if it's intentional or if it's going to transform to something better. Because if they're making a player character that just doesn't get along with anybody else and constantly fights with everybody else, constantly steps on everybody else's toes, I want to make sure that I get this stuff cleared out with the player directly. Having little background channels where you can badmouth other players just breeds toxicity, and it's not a good look, not a good environment, and it's not a healthy thing to have. The problem with Deer was that he would act on his disliking character. All of his NPCs were very standoffish or even rude and hostile towards Knight and Kirby, as well as him giving unfavorable rulings to the two of them. For example, Deer once ran a mission that was set on a magical train, where the staff of said train who summoned us to there were demons in disguise. One of the staff members cast some form of super darkness that Knight could not see through, even though he took a feat specifically so that he could get the Warlock Invocation Devil Sight that states that you can see normally through magical and non-magical darkness. Deer was the DM, however, and arguing against his ruling was against the server rules, so he couldn't even protest too much without getting into trouble. We point out the discretion, but Deer simply insisted that his devil side could not see through the darkness. What was the reason for it? Oh, it's not magical darkness, it's extra magical darkness, it's super magical darkness. Probably some sort of a dumb result like that. But also, pointing out here, toxicity, because now Deer has specific vendetta against Kirby and Knight, and that taking it instead of resolving it or resolving their own personal issues about it and how they feel about the player characters or the players themselves, they're taking it in-game and being toxic to Kirby and Knight for no reason, or Deer specifically with this super magical darkness. What a stupid concept. Devil Sight literally says on the tin, it literally says on the tin, you can see through magical and non-magical darkness. So unless you're coming up with some extra magical or extra supernatural darkness, then it doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. If it's cast by magic, it is magical darkness regardless of what it is. You see, as it later dawned on me, Deer had this philosophy of D&D that it was about the story, but less in a way a lot of genuinely good DMs see it, about it being a collaboration. And instead, he simply saw it as the players over a table being like the players in a play. They have the parts to fulfill, but the outcome in the story beats along the way must stay the same, for the sake of the story. That's a really bad mentality if it literally affects the enjoyment of the players. It's the same thing as saying, oh, you'll get magically put to sleep, and the player in the back goes, hey, I'm actually playing a half-elf and I have Fey ancestry, and magical sleep can't put me to sleep. Like, well, what do you do from that? You just ignore the feature entirely? The whole point for the players to be able to have features and use said features. Let's say I grabbed the invocation of the Runekeeper, Eyes of the Runekeeper, one of my second favorite invocations out there for Warlock, which means I can read all of writing. If I suddenly can't read legible writing, that kind of defeats the purpose of me selecting that invocation. But if a DM is playing properly, they might be able to have me actually be able to read all writing and expands the amount of things that I can interact with in the world properly, instead of just shafting me for the sake of the story. If you literally have to ignore player features and player fun for the sake of the story, maybe it's not that good of a story that'd be worthwhile. Maybe the story should take a little bit of a setback and you focus on player enjoyment instead of just prioritizing story. You should prioritize the players over your story. If you want to prioritize story, write a book. Another time, another DM ran a game where they let us draw from a deck of many things. I drew, I think, a card which reduced Mez's intelligence score, and Kirby drew a card that got rid of all of his magical items. Deer drew a card that gave him a wish, which Kirby and I asked in character for him to use to undo the cards that the two of us got. Though we made it clear out of character that we were fine if he wished for something unrelated, but Kirby's character lost quite a bit of stuff and would want the back character because they're trying to survive and do well not to die instead of telling a good story. And Mez was a selfish and self-absorbed character, like cold beholders are. Deer went ahead and undid the card draw for us, but the DM of the session ruled that this also got rid of the good effect that the other players drew and neutralized the whole deck. Deer was not happy to have used his wish on us, and even made a note on Secret Channel made exactly for this reason, which the players could not see, that he was not to be put in the same session as Kirby. And now you literally have little DMs saying, oh, if this specific player is here, I'm just not joining whatsoever. Continuation with this malice is just going to breed more malice, and toxicity is going to breed toxicity. What Deer is doing is honestly so stupid. So absolutely stupid. I really hope somebody stops him, but this is an RPG horror story, so let's continue. Some time passed, and eventually the original server got shut down because there was a shortage of DMs on that server, and they couldn't keep up with the demand, especially since they had lives outside of the server, which, as lives ebb and flow, were getting busier. When the news hit our server, the DM chat was cheering this on. This is, I think, the first time where I saw past the facade. If you don't like something, then that's fine. But if someone is having fun and not hurting anyone, especially not you, why would you rejoice when people lose the outlet of enjoyment? That didn't sit right with me, and this was where I started to wake up and smell the stench of this second server. Because some people out there are just absolutely awful individuals and are just evil people that will literally cheer on someone else's misery and malice. They'll literally cheer on when somebody else is a misery and malice because they feel like, yeah, serves them right, that's a good thing. At the end of the day, if you're the kind of person that cheers for someone else's downfall, someone else's losses, you're a horrible kind of individual. I understand that some people out there that probably raked up some really negative karma out there, and maybe they'll come up as it's coming up, but I would never, ever in my entire life cheer on for someone else's downfall. Some people get themselves on hot water, and whatever they get is whatever they get. Just desserts or comeuppance coming up finally to bite them in the ass. But I would never go out of my way to cheer on someone else's downfall, because not only is that evil and malicious, but it's also a complete waste of my personal time. If a friend is going through a negative thing, I'll only show them support. If it's somebody that I maybe not so fancy or don't fond of is going through something, I simply simply do nothing. I focus on myself and stay in my lane and focus on the people that are important to me. And for somebody to cheer on for another server's death like this is really malicious and toxic. Not long after my disenchantment, I stopped going along with the flow of the other DMs as much as I would make calls that would actually be fair and equal-handed to both the DMs and players. Namely, I wasn't giving DMs priority in my missions. If I got more applications that I wanted players, your chance of joining my quests were down to how much I wanted you there, or whether you were a DM or not did not factor into it. One day Kirby approached me pointing out that he was having a problem but didn't trust some of the other DMs and admins. He said that he felt like Deer was treating him terribly, which was a problem given that each DM ran an area and each area had its unique thing, with Deer's area running the library, which was like the only place where you could go to learn a new language. Not the most important, but still something that is nice to have access to. Deer's librarian was openly hostile to Kirby's character for no reason. Kirby's character was nice and polite to the librarian, and librarian was seemingly on the verge of starting combat with Kirby's PC right then and there. I honestly kind of snapped and did something I shouldn't have done. I called Deer out in the DM chat. He started to argue with me, and in order to stop being so mad about this, I stepped away to cook myself some soup IRL. When I came back, my DM privileges had been removed. And that is how I stopped being a DM in Dante's server. As soon as you decide to rock the boat, they just simply remove you without addressing the problem in the first place. Because I guess they're just easy to do. Remove somebody out of the way instead of addressing the real problem that is festering there. Honestly, you know, I think they did you a favor. And I hope you got some really lovely soup for yourself. For this next part, I need to explain a few things. Alien and Dante both really like to min-max in certain ways. Like a lot of D&D players, they will pick a concept and try to push that to extreme. Dante's main character on the server, who he named the same as his Discord screen name, and who I shall henceforth call Mini Dante to differentiate between player and character, was a human who multiclassed into fighter and sorcerer with some other things mixed into. His gimmick was that he had very high to hit mod and crazy amount of clockwork amulets, so you could just use those to hit everything consistently. He retired his character at around level 14 or 15, had an in-character aggressive rivalry with Mez. Mini Dante was good at what he did. I was under no delusion that he could beat Mez fairly easy. Mez, however, having the personality of your average beholder, would not let this guy terrorize her and be a threat to her life. Using the rules that they implemented on the server, Mez would go on to train to use light armor, which required being locked away and unplayed for 4 hours each day, 5 days a week, for a total of 30 days. Same with her training with shields, and doing the light armor training made her eligible for medium armor training, which was the same deal. In short, it took 60 days, 5 days a week of me locking myself out of playing my character for several in real life hours at a time for me to get this done. But I stuck with it, and after almost 3 months, Mez was able to use medium armor with shields. She was high enough level that she could take very rare items, and the DM would normally let us choose what items we got from quests. Mez got +2 half plate and a +3 shield. It was a lot of work, but I managed to really get her AC up to make her hardest to kill. It also made sense for the character to have gone through the trouble. +2 half plate and +3 shield? Damn, you gotta be tanky. As a sorcerer too? Damn, you gotta be tanky. Holy hell! But wait a minute, if you're allowed to do that, then I'm pretty sure the other players are also able to do that, including the min-maxer. Wait, am I reading this correctly? Are you coming up? Is this leading up to a PvP? Then I went to one of Dante's missions. Now, it was one thing when he had trouble hitting me because of my AC, but the fact that I had gotten Maz's AC higher than Mini Dante at the time of his retirement was apparently an insult that could not stand. Dante went into the DM chat and lost his crap. He was demanding to know who the hell gave Mez the armor and shield that she was using, freaking out. The funny thing was that the armor she'd taken while was still a DM by an admin, and then a while later, Dante himself was the one who gave Mez the shield. He obviously couldn't really rant about it anymore after that, but he still wasn't happy about the situation. In fact, this was around the time when things got really bad in the DM chat. You see, after my demotion to being a player, things got so off the rails that a number of other DMs broke out of the effects of the spell. The DMs were largely split on the whole thing, and Catgirl and Dogboy were so against the terrible things that were going on at this point that they put their own DM statuses on the line by secretly leaking what was being said in the DM chat to me. I've seen screenshots of Deer and Dante literally taking inspiration from Goblin Hunter, planning on how they could strip her of her magic and magical items, and then have her gangbanged by goblins against her will. According to what they said in the screenshot, it would be perfectly acceptable because, and I quote, "She is not a woman, she is a beholder in a woman's skin." They eventually decided against it because they had the weird and warped perception of me, which made them seemingly think that I would enjoy that for some reason, which if anything is absurd given how I get too attached to my characters who are almost always female. I know that all you have to go on is my word, but their assessment of me was unique to them, and everyone else who I was friends with who saw what was more than a little confusing about how they reached such a conclusion. Last part was a rant, and I'm sorry, but I'm keeping that in. If you're really a freak kind of player, you probably wouldn't be sticking around with this specific game, or you probably look for a game where you wanted to play like I don't know, like a more kinky type of fetish game, but you're playing literally a beholder that kind of is self-important and high and mighty. I mean, I don't know, maybe you do get a little bit freaky in the ERP chat. I don't know, honestly, I have no idea. But like I said, the festering and toxicity in the DM chat is just showing up. Kudos on Catgirl and Dogboy for leaking some of this stuff, because oh boy howdy, dude, when it gets to the point where the DM chats and the private chats of the DMs get leaked to somebody, you know things are cooked. You know things are beyond repair, beyond fixing, because right now I have Dante and Deer that are literally just being two toxic a-holes just plotting for somebody else's demise, because they are now realizing, oh wait a minute, we gave somebody magical items that are too powerful. How do we ruin the character and strip them of the magical items and destroy the fantasy of the character? All right, yeah, let's pull a Goblin Slayer and force them to be going through a horrible nightmare situation. These DMs suck, dude. Honestly, shout out to Catgirl and Dogboy for having your back and finally being disenchanted by this spell. I don't see how people still want to stick around this server this long. I mean, I guess if it's like a sunk cost spell, so you sunk all this time into the server, you probably don't want to leave, but you're also kind of realizing that the people in there are just awful. Dude, it's terrible. I feel you, because I've been in a server with a bunch of terrible DMs too, that also badmouth players and sometimes try to set specific players up for failure, which is not okay in my book whatsoever. As a DM, you're supposed to be setting up your players for success, regardless if you're playing with just a few friends or you're running like a large Westmarches style server. If you finally find yourself to the point where you're plotting with a different DM for another player character's or just player in general's failure, and you're plotting how to make them fail, that's not good whatsoever. At that point, I feel like you've lost the plot and you shouldn't be a DM, because you're actively going to try to screw somebody over and trying to ruin their fun. And as a DM, that's an a-hole thing to do. As a DM, you should be playing with your players, not against your players. With the above, you can see that there were plots to violate Mez. I didn't get too many details, but I also did get multiple leaks that Deer was planning on killing Mez off when he got the chance. This is something that was out of line that multiple people came to me with the information, but Deer wasn't too clear on exactly how he planned to go about it. So there's only so much they could warn me about. Yeah, because people don't want to have the player character killed off unfairly, especially if the DM is gunning to kill off the player character completely unfairly, just trying to target them. That's not a fair thing to do. Play with your players, not against them. And if it is some sort of a death, unless the player specifically wants to kill off the character and end their story there, I feel like the only time it's alright to do a player character death is if the dice just roll this way when it wasn't originally planned. I recently had to deal with a player character death because the dice just rolled in a specific way, and unfortunately, because of the circumstances with the character that the player specifically agreed with ahead of time, they were reborn, but they want to go extra hardcore on the rules of healing and stuff and healing items and everything, like specifically make it so that healing potions wouldn't heal them, and that's what the player wanted themselves. But as a DM, I never plotted or planned for any player character to die. Hell, I don't want to kill off my player characters. I want them to have a good time. I want my players to be able to have a fulfilling experience to play a specific character to the fullest. And if somebody ends up dying, I want to find a way to get them resurrected as soon as possible so the player can continue playing the character that they want to play. If somebody's tired of the player character, they want to move on to a different one, so be it. But at the end of the day, if your DM is actively plotting for your player character's death, that's not a good DM. You shouldn't be playing with this kind of DM, because they're actively playing against you instead of with you. This reached a boiling point after Mez reached level 17. Now, I was not the first player to hit level 17, but I was the first player to reach level 17 on a full caster. As a sorcerer, Mez also got access to a little spell called Wish at that level, which I'm sure you think you know where this is going, but I think you're going to be surprised by this twist. Mez didn't actually wish for anything game-breaking. She didn't wish to make any big changes to the world or anything like that. No, Mez was smarter than that, and her past life experience with the spell taught her that making a wish for something outside of its usual scope was a recipe for disaster. Instead, Mez used Wish to effectively cast the spell Clone as an action without needing any material components. This once again made Dante blow a gasket in DM chat, along with some of their DMs, because I basically had them dead to rights. I actually waited for Dante to be around, and Mez RP performed this spell in front of his favorite NPC. Rules is written, he couldn't screw me over in any meaningful way. After 120 days, Mez would be basically unkillable with this spell up her sleeve. To mess me over at this stage, she would have to have gone in plain sight of everybody, and very literally violate the description of one of the most well-known spells in the whole game. I saw the screenshots, he wasn't even one who was the most mad about the situation in them, funnily enough. And like I said before, it just breeds more toxicity. This is not, dude, this is not a great look, man. This is just not a great look whatsoever. A few days after the Wish incident, I joined a mission run by Dante. It was an expedition to the Hells, where his favorite NPC sent us down to rescue someone or something. This was back in like 2021, so the details elude my memory at this point. We got to a place with nowhere to rest up after a pretty tough fight. We were forced to spend some time down in the Hells with no way to rest up and not knowing what the next part of our mission would be. Little did I know, this was all part of the plan, as this meant the party, and most importantly Mez, would have 2 levels of exhaustion. In this event that has forever carved into my memory, the 2 levels of exhaustion is what gives you half movement speed. With the party exhausted enough, the stage was set for Dante's big plan. We got into a fight with some Woe Striders and Rust Monsters. Now, much like Beholders, Woe Striders give off an anti-magic field in a line of sight. Rust Monsters, on the other hand, rust any non-magical metals that they come into contact with. Simply put, the Woe Strider effectively turned my armor non-magical, which allowed for the Rust Monster to destroy them, turning Mez's 23 AC to 12 once again. Dante had also ruled the very rare items were now a no-go for being given out even to higher level parties and players. Sadly for Mez, it was only got worse from there. After the fight, the party managed to find themselves in a haven where they could rest up. I was able to get Mez some mundane armor, so it was certainly a downgrade from her armor that she came in with, but at least it was better than no armor. A day later, the party went up against that big bad that they were sent down to the Hells to get rid of. This guy had some ability to let him control lava, letting him raise it and lower it at will, which was a pain for almost everyone in the party except for Mez, who could spend a sorcery point and bonus action to fly because of her subclass. The big bad then cast some spell that would mess up all the party members, but Mez, needing her party to stay alive so that her chance of survival went up, counterspelled the guy. This led to him casting Power Word Kill on Mez as a legendary action. When the NPC that sent us there came in to save the day, the party was not allowed to bring Mez's corpse with them. So you used counterspell to try to save a party member, and your DM took it personally. They're probably waiting for you to do something, and suddenly the trigger, the counterspell. Alright, fine, Power Word Kill as legendary action! Wow, what a skillful and genius maneuver. Power Word Kill as legendary action? Wow, who would have thought of that? What kind of big brain maneuver you have to think of? What kind of giant brain wrinkles you gotta have to come up with something so blatantly easy and dumb like that? Like, if you just want to kill a player character, you just say, okay, you're dead. Because as a DM, guess what? You have the ability to just be like, rocks fall, everybody dies because you're the ultimate arbiter of what ends up happening. But this was specifically plotted to try to wait for you to be at your lowest and to try to kill off your character maliciously, because these DMs are playing against you and against the players, not with the players. If they have a problem with you personally or had a problem with your player character, they should have addressed it directly to you instead of doing this farce, because this is farce. This is all just performance for them. This is all performative at this point. I might as well say this is all performance. It's so dumb. I hate it. Now, we move on a bit to talk about Zarzi. Like I said, she was the only character that I ever ERP'd with at the time. That was all well and good under the server rules, so long as you stuck to certain rules. She started off in a poly relationship with Alucard and a good friend of hers, but then the two of them got bored of those characters, so they got written out throughout being teleported into the future. While Zarzi was on a mission and she would pine for them, meet some people and get into friends with benefits relationship with one of them, but never actually go for that kind of romance outside of the physical stuff. Then the admins that decided that ERP wouldn't be allowed in the server anymore. So be it. I played my character for more than just imaginary hanky-panky, so not only did I stop ERPing, I didn't even do a fade to black things. Much like things with women earlier, which actually happened later, they had completely misread how I see my character and women and were shocked that I was able to abstain from ERPing and also stayed interested in playing my character. That said, the rule was not meant for me specifically, but they clearly did hope to catch me out along with some others, doing the deed. According to what I saw in screenshots, they simply wanted to read through what was happening in the rooms of other people without having to read ERP between characters they did not like. If you didn't want to read through ERP, why are you allowing ERP in the first place? You can't have your cake and eat it too. Either allow people to privately ERP there and just don't look in those channels, or have a policy of, hey, if you want to ERP, create your own private channels and private threads and private chats or whatever. Take you to the DMs and stuff if you really want to. Also, imagine they're shocked. Suddenly, you still want to play your character after you invested so much time time with them, even without ERP. The horror! I feel like if you were kind of player that mainly just wanted to focus on ERP, you wouldn't even join D&D, you just join some sort of ERP, RP Discord server and just do that. Why go through the foreplay of playing D&D just to get some imaginary hanky-panky with an NPC and a player character and stuff or whatever? Sounds like a lot of work. Sounds like a lot of work and a lot of investment. And in fact, other games online out there that probably do that too. There's so many hentai games out there where you could have an RPG experience and the hanky-panky. So many. You have no idea how many games I almost said own, but I don't actually own that many. I own a decent collection, but it usually just sits there and I usually never touch it. I consider playing it. I'm like, no, I just never get around to it. Anyway, let's continue. Zarzi bounced around. She moved to another vampire coven hideout and then moved in with several friends. She even got a Tressum as a pet that I would RP every now and again, going flying cat things around the house on Tupperbot. DMs leaked to several players that a purge was coming and it had become an open secret that it was going to happen at any point. Still enjoyed my remaining time with Zarzi, and this was not something the DMs who didn't like me could stand. With me simply enjoying having Zarzi about the most playing cat girls quests, there wasn't a whole lot they could do to Zarzi. Then the day finally came. Managed to catch a DM that Dante had posted to the announcement channel, and I had been in there for about 20 seconds before I got kicked. Me happening to be on the toilet at work at the time meant it was enough time for me to manage to screenshot the thing and then send it around as needed to explain to confused people why they weren't in the server anymore. Zarzi was happily living her best life with her friends and a farm full of animals, including her own Tressum. And myself and about 2/3 of the player base were kicked out of the server. The fallout and aftermath weren't too juicy if you ask me, and the knowledge that I have of times after are sparse. Kirby remained in the server and I would ask him about it every now and again, as he was also in my weekly campaign at this point, and he would give me some information from time to time. After the purge, what I do know is that there were very lone members. On top of people who had been kicked, they also figured they needed fewer DMs, so they also demoted a bunch of people. Some people left on their own volition, some because they were demoted from DM to player and didn't like that. Others because their friends had been kicked, and some simply because they did not like the purge. About an hour after the purge, however, Alien left a message in Discord server from our weekly game which said that he was no longer going to be player and then left the server. He didn't go into detail and I never really told anyone the full story though. He was far from only person who was there, and I wasn't even bullied as badly as Knight was. Like one time when he was sad that his character died, Dante had his favorite NPC reincarnate him into a race he didn't like and then turn him into a frog with true polymorph. Scare him into thinking that he would be a critter going forward and release the concentration on that spell at the last possible second without telling the player his intentions. Gee, you sound like you're playing with a lot of really fun people to play with. They just want to mess with others. These are the kind of DMs that are absolutely awful and antagonistic. The kind of people that literally see their players as not other people at the table, but almost as their playthings to mess with because they have vendetta and bitterness and toxicity against them. Seriously, their private chats, their backroom talk, their water cooler DM talk really just bred a lot of toxicity. And the fact that it's just allowed to happen and continue like this and nothing was ever being in check, and nobody ever called this stuff out publicly or took responsibility for this. What happened to the server owners taking responsibility for this kind of stuff? I mean, at the end of the day, I think everybody is responsible in this situation, especially the server owner. If you're running a server where you're supposed to play D&D and stuff, and you have DMs that are literally just festering toxicity to each other, and it becomes like a toxicity circle jerk, then it should be your responsibility as the owner of the server to put that stuff down and remove people that shouldn't be in those positions in the first place. If somebody is not going to be a good DM or going to be DM in good faith, probably don't have them DM on there. With the lack of players that they had following the purge, there wasn't much going on and everything was deserted, so they needed an influx of players. They went about this by making partnerships with other Westmarch servers. Basically, you promote us and we'll promote you, so people who enjoy Westmarches who are in each server can check the other and we both gain potential players. The problem was that the biggest server that they partnered with was a server whose whole thing was about ERP far more than actual standard D&D. I'm sure that I don't need to explain that they basically had to lift the ban on ERP for a while and then they tried to implement it again, which led to a mass exodus which didn't help. Deer was unhappy enough with how things had turned out on the server that he had left at some point following the purge. There was also a time skip which resets everyone's characters immediately following the purge. So even if you didn't get kicked for the server or leave on your own volition, your characters were basically gone in the ether regardless. What a great... Either it's a really stupid way or a great way just to completely kill off the server. Hey, all the investment and progress you made, da-da-da-da, it's reset. Your character progress and everything you've done is gone. We're just gonna wipe the whole thing clean like it's some sort of like a battle royale game or something. So stupid. So stupid, for real. And that, my friends, is a long, very drawn-out story of various bumps on the road that highlighted my experience with this particular server, framed as a horror story. oh, this is definitely a horror story. The truth is that, while I would never play a game under Dante or D or Alien again, I did make some very good friends along the way who make for great company and lovely roleplay partners. I admit that a bunch of the characters that I introduced in the introduction didn't play nearly as big of a role in the abridged version or nearly a year of events, but I guess it's just how things go. I have some more stories on my time in the server, but I think I've covered the main points and would need some more time to remember some of the juicier stuff, which I'm sure I'll remember within a minute of sending this email off, once it would be too late to add anything else. Thanks a lot for reading if you actually made it all the way. It's been a long journey, but it's been nice to just sit down and get all this out on paper after all this time. The end. And thank you so much for your story submission. I hope it feels good to finally be able to release this pent-up frustration and stress. And as somebody who went through my own Westmarches server, exodus and everything, I can relate to you on a lot of bases. One, the DM toxicity and favoritism is just blatant and awful. Somebody that's running a D&D server should be always in mind. And I mean, I'm very much in mind with that because I'm the one that started the D&D server. But so I'm very much in mind that I don't want to have the kind of experiences that I had. DM toxicity and the circle jerk of toxicity around the water cooler conversations and private DMs, it's just gonna breed some of the most toxic environments possible. And most of the times have to start with your DMs handling things in good faith. If your DMs are being toxic about it and talking bad about specific players or group of players or specific players are being singled out, that just creates a bad faith situation where those players will never ever be treated fairly whatsoever unless it's nipped in the bud. The best and the most optimal way to do this, if a DM has a problem with a player, address it to him directly and talk it out amicable, diplomatic ways to try to find a solution together so both the player and the DM can be happy about it. Not start bad-mouthing somebody or spreading rumors or just gaslighting other people about this sort of thing. You need to be able to communicate about this. Talking and communication would solve everything. Your story is a great lesson for other people out there that maybe consider having their own Westmarches server on what kind of things not to do. But hey, at the end of the day, you finally escaped the hellhole. And they did you the favor of not only removing you as a DM, but also just removing you out from the server. They did you the great pleasure of letting you go and finally letting you be free. What kind DMs they are, huh? Seriously though, with all the experience you've received from all this thing, honestly, if you started your own Westmarches server with a cat girl and dog boy and whoever else you got out there going on, probably would have the experience to be able to run it like way better than Dante, Alien, and D were able to run it. I want to read more Westmarch servers burning down to the ground because of horrible things happening. I'm genuinely hooked on Westmarch Downfall arc. Not that specific I want Westmarches to go into Downfall arc, but it's always such a messy situation because you have so many DMs involved and players involved. It just, it's such an eruption explosion. It's so messy every time. In a way, it's catharsis. It's just catharsis seeing some of this stuff and how horrible actors get their comeuppance, get their just desserts in this kind of situation. Now, I did say that wishing for someone else's downfall is not a good thing, and definitely I would not want to wish for anybody else's Westmarch server downfall, but man, can I say, does it feel like karmic justice when terrible DMs and terrible actors get just desserts, like in the situation when the server basically started crumbling down. And they started crumbling down not because of anything else specific except their own actions. Their own actions caused the downfall, which is poetic and perfect because it's like the universe balances itself out. And with that, that's going to be all our stories for today. I want to thank you very much for watching and thanks so much for being here. If you like what I do, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Also, if the RPG Horror Stories ever goes down or if you want to submit your own personalized horror story, email is down in the description below. I'll see you again in more Tales Tomorrow. Bye-bye.